Big story with the Houston Texans all off season long, or until they decide to do something about said storyline, is what happens with Deshaun Watson. We know the Texans have the 3rd overall pick. We know they would have traded Deshaun Watson before the draft last year. Instead, the legal situation arose, and Deshaun Watson, facing 22 civil lawsuits and 10 criminal complaints, became a player the Texans could not deal before the draft. They came close to trading him to the Miami Dolphins before the trade deadline, but Deshaun Watson, as we enter the offseason and the new league year starting on March 16th, remains a Houston Texan, and the biggest question surrounding this team is when and to which team will they be trading Deshaun Watson to?
Buccaneers popped up on the radar over the weekend thanks to Chris Mortensen. He just kind of threw that in there when he was talking about the Deshaun Watson situation, so I thought that was an interesting link to have the Buccaneers there. Now, of course, if Tom Brady's not actually retired or thinks about coming back, the Buccaneers would no longer be interested in Deshaun Watson.
I saw something earlier today that had MVP odds for the 2022 NFL season, and Tom Brady's on there.
Oh.
It's like plus 4,500, which are not normal Tom Brady odds, but you can still bet on Tom Brady coming back and winning MVP next season.
Ooh, I might throw a tenner on that.
I'm telling you, I'm thinking the same thing.
I might throw a tenner on that.
The guy can clearly play. He finished runner-up for MVP this year at the age of 44. If he comes back, there's no reason to believe he couldn't be in the mix next year, too.
So the more I think about this Deshaun Watson situation, I had hoped that there would be a timeline that is similar to the Matt Stafford thing from last year, where a team had an agreement to trade for Deshaun Watson. The terms were agreed to, and that was just going to get executed when the new year started. I believe this thing could go all the way up to the draft, especially if Nick Caserio has multiple teams and plays them against each other, similar to the way he did last year prior to Deshaun Watson's legal situation becoming public and making it unable for the Texans to trade Deshaun Watson. This thing could go as far as Thursday night of the NFL draft before we know where Deshaun Watson is headed.
It could take longer than that, couldn't it? I mean, I wouldn't want that to happen. I hope the Texans can get a deal done by the NFL draft, but like hypothetically, it doesn't have to get done by the draft. It could happen after the draft, and then the picks that the Texans accumulate in that deal could be for next year and the year after that. So, yeah, we've talked about it a lot. You want it to be before this year's draft so you know where some of the picks that you're getting are going to take place, right? If you trade for future draft picks, you have no idea where those picks will ultimately be. If you trade for picks in this year's draft, you know exactly where they are. So in a perfect world, yeah, the Texans get this deal done, hell, before the start of the league year, like you said, Cody, but definitely before the first round of the NFL draft, so they have an extra first-round pick or two this year.
That's as close to a nightmare scenario as the actual nightmare scenario, which is nobody trades for Deshaun Watson, and the Texans got to do the same thing over again next year, which is let him sit and pay him a boatload of money. What would cause it to linger past the draft? Because I would assume most teams are going to enter the draft with an idea what they need to do at the quarterback spot. It would be very weird for a team to be rookie quarterback or Deshaun Watson. Is that the legal situation that would have it lingering past the draft? I just, that feels like an unacceptable outcome to me if I was the Texans. Like, this thing cannot linger past the draft.
Right. I think it's a legal situation. If anything prevents this deal from getting done before the draft, I think it would be the legal situation. And the deposition for Deshaun Watson starts next week. So it feels like we can start to get the ball rolling a little bit here in the not-too-distant future. But if this thing really drags on, Jake, then yeah, that might be the thing that prevents a Watson deal from getting done. But it's such an average quarterback draft class, and it's such a below-average quarterback free agency class. And there are so many teams, we ran down some of them yesterday, that feel a quarterback away. Like, if you're a quarterback away, you shouldn't be drafting Matt Corral and saying, we're good. Mm-hmm. That takes care of our quarterback problem. You shouldn't be drafting Sam Howell and saying, that's fine. We've got our quarterback figured out. We don't need to do anything else at that position. We're okay. If you're one of these teams that's a quarterback away, the Steelers, the Colts, the Titans,
Browns,
the Broncos, the Browns, if you're one of those teams that has a loaded roster, a win-now-ready roster, but just needs a quarterback, then you should be doing whatever you possibly can to acquire Deshaun Watson before the draft.
One of those teams is reportedly the Bucs. They're looking into Deshaun Watson. That would be a disgrace if they traded him to Tampa Bay. A terrible deal for the Texans. If the best thing they get back in that trade offer is just the pick that right now is the 27th pick in the first round. Yes, Deshaun's got the no trade, but there has to be an understanding that wherever you trade him, you're still trying to maximize his value. Like the Texans need to go to Deshaun Watson and say, look, you don't want to be here. We want to trade you, but you got to work with us. Give us some teams. These are the teams that have picks near the top 10 or in the top 10 that are interested in you. Can you give us a couple teams that you'd be willing to go to and start there? It doesn't work with Tampa Bay having that 27th overall pick. And it's a good thing they didn't trade him to Miami because Miami doesn't own their own pick. They own the Niners pick this year, and that's the 29th overall pick. So I think any scenario where Deshaun ends up in Tampa would be awful for the return you're eventually going to get. So yes, Tampa being interested is good because maybe it drives up the price for Deshaun overall. But I feel like if they settle and end up sending him to Tampa Bay and the only big return you get in this year's draft class is the 27th overall pick, that'd be a major letdown for what I think they could eventually turn Deshaun Watson into.
It would feel like a bit of a disappointment if the Deshaun Watson draft pick that you added was the 27th overall pick. And it's not like Tampa would enter that deal with, okay, well, we know our draft pick's lower, so let's add some talented players in there. Like, they're not going to trade you Tristan Wirfs, their right tackle, who's really good. They're not going to trade you one of their really good linebackers. They're not going to trade you one of their really good defensive linemen. Like, that's not going to be a part of the scenario. And I've said from the beginning, I don't want players. I want all picks. Like, I want Nick Caserio or whoever the next GM after Nick Caserio is to be able to write their name on those draft picks.
I'd take Tristan Wirfs.
Well, they're not going to, but what I'm saying is, like, that wouldn't pop. Like,
Okay.
yeah, I'd take Tristan Wirfs. Yeah, I'd take Vita Vea. I'd take the linebacker that they got.
Devin White.
Like,
All
I'd
right.
take those
Just
cats
making
for
sure we're on the same page there.
Yeah, but those guys aren't coming in a Deshaun Watson trade because the Deshaun Watson trade is about keeping that championship window open. If you're the Bucs, the argument the Bucs would have is like, okay, our picks are less valuable, but you'll get more of them. You get more first-round picks. You get more second-round picks. But I would rather have the known quantity of that top 10, top 15 pick and have 3 overall first-round picks than have the 27th overall pick and have an additional first-round pick in a fourth year.
Right, because the Bucs pick is lower this year, but also their future picks will be lower too.
Correct.
I mean, if they get Deshaun Watson, like there are some teams that if they add Deshaun, it's like, all right, like that's probably going to push them near the top of the league. If Tampa Bay adds Deshaun Watson, we already know how good they've been the last couple of years. They've got a lot of free agents. They might lose a couple of guys, but that's still a Super Bowl-ready roster with Deshaun Watson in the mix. So not only would it be 27 this year, Jake, it could be lower than 27 for the next couple of years if you make that move.
The only teams the Texans should consider trading Deshaun Watson to are teams that are picking in the top 10, right around the top 10, or in the case of Philadelphia, a team that has 3 first-round picks in this year's draft. That's 15, 16, and 19. Other than that, the dream scenario still remains the New York Giants because they have the number 5 and number 7 pick. I don't think the Giants will be in on Deshaun. Their owner has already said as much. Brian Dable spoke about Daniel Jones and coaching him up. I do not think Deshaun's in play in New York. So then you look at the Carolina Panthers with that number 6 overall pick, an aggressive owner, a coach on the hot seat. I think Carolina makes some sense. Atlanta at number 8. They're in the top 10. Matt Ryan's contract, only 1 more year of guaranteed salary. They can move on from him this year, and then they could try and acquire Deshaun Watson to get Arthur Smith his long-term quarterback. Denver at number 9 makes a lot of sense because they were in on Deshaun, we were told, last year. They certainly have that top 10 pick. If they can't get Aaron Rodgers or they can't get Russell Wilson, you're in prime position if you're the Houston Texans to still try and maximize Deshaun's value with a top 10 pick. So those are the teams that are in the top 10. I mentioned Philadelphia because of their 3 first-round picks, and I'll give you one more team. The Washington Commanders. Ron Rivera's already spoke about the need to add a veteran, why they're an attractive destination. You might say, well, they can't handle the baggage of Deshaun when they're dealing with the Daniel Schneider stuff. That's more the reason to do it. Your reputation already stinks. Why not double down and at least win games if you're going to be, an organization that's frowned upon? Win games with Deshaun as your quarterback. Deshaun Watson in the NFC East, you talk about a team that right away would have a legitimate chance to win that division and compete, going forward. So I look at those teams that are in the top 10, right near the top 10, or the Eagles because of their 3 first-round picks in the teens as the teams that make the most sense for Deshaun Watson.
One of those teams sticks out to me as a slightly better option than some of the other ones. Can I tell you about it next?
No, now.
All right. Well, I don't want to tell you right now.
Dang it. I guess I'm going to have to sit through this break.
There you go.
Out.
Cody's team is coming up next right here on the Wheelhouse, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.